My name is Paul Meyer, and I'm Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at Marshall 86. Today I want to talk about blended threats, an emergent problem that they present for the enterprise. Essentially blended threats are attacks that take place via the email vector and are deployed through the web. And the challenge with that is that, according to Gartner, only about 15% of companies currently have the ability to filter inbound web traffic to combat these emerging threats. A blended threat is extremely complex, and in the past, malware writers and hackers essentially set up dedicated websites that would deliver malicious code. And for a web filtering vendor, you could easily identify these sites and put them into your URL library and provide an effective barrier to stop these attacks. Today what happens is, and maybe a diagram would help, essentially an attacker hacks a legitimate website and injects malware into that site. They then will generate email that will bypass a traditional spam antivirus filter at the email gateway because it doesn't contain any malware or malicious code. Instead, what it contains is a link to a site that then will deliver that malicious code payload. What happens then is they send that email, it gets through to the user. If the user then clicks on that link, then the malware gets downloaded, and a traditional web filter, because this is a legitimate site, a traditional web filter won't catch that exploit as it's coming through the system. Instead, it will bypass that web filter, will automatically download to the user's machine, and then the user becomes infected. Once the user is infected, they could either become part of a botnet network, or it could download malicious code of some kind, spyware, or a Trojan, or a keylogger that will then take valuable confidential information and send that outside of the networked environment. Well, traditional antivirus platforms are installed at the email gateway, and they use signature-based technology to identify malicious code that might be contained within an email. In the case of a blended threat, that initial email does not include any malicious code in the message itself, but rather it's a link to a site that has that malicious code embedded. And the challenge is that, for example, if you received an email from Bank of America and the virus user spoofed a Bank of America email, it would be very difficult for the average user to discern that that was a malicious email. And certainly the signature-based antivirus wouldn't flag that as spam, but it would bypass that traditional platform. With blended threats, the real challenge is that in order to effectively combat those threats, you need to have a deep understanding of what's happening at the email gateway as well as the web gateway. So they're a multi-pronged attack that requires a vendor or an application to understand what's behind the email content, not just any possible malicious code that may be there. And in order to effectively do that, you've got to understand spam trending. You've got to have an extensive threat network that will alert you to those problems. And on the website, you have to have an understanding of the spam patterns that drive traffic to those hacked sites. And in the past, it used to be that virus writers and malicious code writers would set up websites dedicated to downloading malware. Well, these days, these blended threats will bypass that step, and instead they inject malware directly into legitimate sites. So a web filter that doesn't do any kind of behavior-based analysis won't understand or won't know that this is malicious code because it is effectively on a legitimate site. So that's what makes them very problematic and challenging to block. Now, the only way to truly combat blended threats is to take an approach that leverages both an understanding of exploits through email as well as through the web. So for example, on the email side, you've got to look at the content, you've got to look at the links that are in any specific message. And then on the website, it's not enough to simply crawl the web looking for malicious code and malicious software, because you can't possibly crawl the entire internet. So many vendors simply crawl the web looking for these malicious links. And a more effective approach would, and essentially it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. A more effective approach would essentially use spam trending to follow essentially a thread that's attached to that needle in a haystack. That is spam that drives traffic to those sites that are injected with malicious code and malware. So you really need a solution that's going to look at both the email and the web vectors and shares data and information between those two platforms. Well, Marshall 86 takes a multi-layered approach to both email and web security. So we don't rely just on standard antivirus signature technology, but we also layer in additional security that we have added to our portfolio with the acquisition of Avinti. Avinti is a company that has developed a behavior-based malware detection tool that essentially uses virtual machine technology to detect malicious links and then to filter or block those links in real time. So on the MailMarshal platform, we deploy what we're calling the blended threats module behind our traditional AV scanner. So any message that makes it past that AV scanner is then analyzed by the Avinti blended threats module, and we're able to identify, but through the behavior of the link itself, whether it's malicious or benign. More importantly, we then take that malicious link information and in real time send that to our network of R3000 web security platforms. And in real time, we can take the malicious link information from the email vector and can block those URLs on the website as well. What this multi-layered approach does is it doesn't depend on the email platform to provide a library-based list of URLs that are known to carry malicious code, because in most cases these blended threats use malicious code that is deployed to a legitimate website. So instead we have that extra measure of security which uses the malicious links that are identified in real time from the email side of the house and then blocks them on the website. So what you get is, again, a multi-layered approach that leverages both the email as well as the web gateway platforms.